Hello and welcome to County Board Wrap-Up, our look at the key actions the County Board takes at its monthly meeting. I'm Kara O'Donnell, and today I'll be asking Board Chair Christian Dorsey as well as Board Member Matt DeFerranti about the decisions they made at the October meeting. Decisions that impact you, your family, and our community. Let's get right into it with the Arlington-Alexandria joint meeting. Now, explain to me a little bit. We talked, I guess, almost this time last year about the Arlington-Alexandria joint proposal for the Amazon bid.
Right.
What was this meeting all about?
Well, you know, very much based on what has happened and transpired over the last year, Arlington and Alexandria are absolutely going to be the two communities where most of any kind of displacement effects or pressures that we can't foresee from Amazon and associated investment, we're going to be the place where this happens. So instead of being reactive to it, Alexandria and Arlington are going to come together in advance of any real investment coming to the community to figure out how we can have this growth be inclusive and really benefit a broad segment of the population, and more importantly, not displace anyone involuntarily. So while we know that Amazon is going to be phased in over the next decade, we certainly do anticipate that at some point there may be opportunities that are going to affect lower income people primarily in terms of where they live, and we want to be sure that we are working together as early as possible to prevent those from being negative effects.
I thought the meeting was a great one in that we had that balance of seeing the big picture challenges of housing and transportation and education, and thinking about what really can this partnership achieve that's different from what we've done separately as a county in the city of Alexandria. So I think it was a great start, and is also consistent with, you know, in January we talked about what are the sort of contagion, the other impacts that could come from moving forward in this way, which we all supported on the board. And this is sort of the first step towards fulfilling the promise that I think that that of inclusive growth that we all want to see from this.
Yeah.
So it was a great start, I really felt.
Now, are there any issues with this kind of partnership, with Arlington being a county structure of government versus Alexandria being a city? Have we run into any challenges that way?
Well, you know, Arlington and Alexandria have a long history of working together, but when it comes to how do you get two separate local governments to be able to either combine resources or have joint authority over something, there's really not much in the Virginia state code in this playbook, so we're going to have to create something. And we still haven't figured out exactly what that will be, but we'll leverage our long history of working together to clean up 4 Mile Run and make it more flood resilient. We'll leverage all of the things that we've done on various initiatives over the years and come up with an infrastructure, sort of a governance model, but more importantly, get our staff working, really working on similar agendas when it comes to ensuring growth in the housing supply so that we deal with structural unaffordability to housing, that we create new opportunities for women and minority-owned small businesses, that we make sure that all of this investment coming through Virginia Tech in higher and K-12 education benefits kids who would ordinarily be left behind when it comes to this level of attention. So I'm excited. I think we get a chance to make growth happen in a way that is inclusive and equitable, and that's only going to happen if we work together and start early, and that's why we've gotten the ball rolling so far.
And this isn't kind of an official government merger or community merger per se. This is just a collaboration of sorts.
I made an offer we could annex the city of Alexandria, but they've got their own history and they were happy with that. So we're gonna respect that and work together as separate entities.
I think, and also, I mean, I don't remember that offer of annexation as well as you do, but at all levels, at the staff level. And then there will be an opportunity for citizens really interested in inclusive growth to join. And then there'll also be a couple of board members that will be engaging. All of us will be aware, but it's that sort of flexible approach that and focusing on these key topics that made this a great start, and we'll follow up.
And is it pretty much housing focused right now, or are we looking at all of those key issues, housing, transportation, real estate, all of those different
You know, the great thing about our joint meeting, Matt, I don't know if you remember, so we gathered at the start of the month, October 1st, and we've got all 12 elected officials, 7 from Alexandria, 5 from Arlington, and we go through this facilitated process to identify what are the priorities. And housing, unsurprisingly, and much to my pleasure, was the clear runaway top priority issue. And then the other ones were consistent with this idea of inclusive growth. How do we help small businesses who traditionally get left behind when it comes to massive kinds of investments in communities? That was sort of a secondary priority, as was the desire to make sure that there were career pathways through the education sphere for people to get tech trained, but also for kids coming up to have access to the kinds of curricula that will benefit them from our becoming this sort of tech hub, in this area. So those were kind of the 3 major priorities, and while we're going to pay attention to transportation, we feel like that's something that's further along in terms of our handling what is to come. It's these other areas where we know we have to sharpen our pencils and do something differently.
And we should say that there's a lot of great things that each jurisdiction is already doing. We were really trying to think about what new steps do we need to take. So those three areas really did stand out for me too.
So where's it go from here?
So we're talking all the time, and right now it's at the staff level where County Manager Schwartz here in Arlington and the City Manager in Alexandria, Mark Jenks, are going to have their staffs iterate some ideas for how we take what we talked about on the first and how we operationalize it in the near term. So we'll wait for that. We should get something to respond to by the end of the year, and then we'll go through and we'll work some things out, and then hopefully as soon as is practicable, we'll talk about how we're going to actually realize what we began committing to on the first.
Okay, well, we'll see where that goes. But speaking of housing and growth, as a bit of a segue there, the board also approved some moves for a new apartment building in Crystal City. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit
you
about
want to talk
that.
about that, Matt?
Sure. So this is actually all of the stakeholders in this project. This is kind of near what has been called the teardrop parcel.
Okay.
Down there, there's I believe it's a Verizon parking lot that we are going to, that's the building location for this site. And I have not heard of buildings that have come forward with so few, almost all the stakeholders. There was one issue that had to be discussed a little bit, but almost all the stakeholders had worked through in the county process, the county meetings with the community, had really resolved most everything. And so one of the key benefits is going to be some funding for a park and open space, which is right in that area. And I think this is a big step forward. I won't miss the view of that parking lot particularly. But I think it's a big step forward, and it helps to address, we have talked about the need for housing supply, and in that neighborhood it's going to be necessary. And I think that it will that additional housing will help address some of that supply. We're not claiming that rents are going to go down in that area, but if you don't build any additional units as we grow, then the cost will continue to go up. So I was
just going to say, how does this factor in not only with the growth surrounding Amazon, but the entire Crystal City sector plan?
Yeah. I mean, this was always an identified site in the sector plan to bring new forms, new housing. The great thing about this is it does, as Matt mentioned, and this is right sort of at HQ2 Central, because it's at the corner of Army-Navy Drive and South 11th Street, down right between Pentagon City and Crystal City. And in addition to a 19-story building that's going to have 300 some odd units, the important thing is we're getting 12 affordable units on site, which is something that rarely happens. Typically we get cash from the affordable housing contribution, which goes into sites elsewhere. This project is delivering a dozen sites with the development, which is incredibly important to make sure that growth can be inclusive and beneficial, and that we can have an opportunity for people with constrained incomes to live near Metro in a high amenity, sustainable building. And this site, which is an interesting one, it's the Verizon telecom facility, and we've got some infill that's happening across the street. This one will come, and then as a result of both of them being built, we'll have some vacant property, if you will, which will be developed into some open space. We have yet to go through the process of determining what that open space will look like, but we have developer contributions, and we have money within our capital improvement plan to make sure that we're delivering some much needed open space in the area as well.
Again, keeping with the
With
goals
the Crystal
of the
City
sector
Sector
plan.
Plan, indeed.
All right, we'll see how that goes as well. We are going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll take a look at what the county has learned during its study about scooters, dockless bicycles, and then what the next steps are. We'll also discuss the new design for Fire Station 8. Welcome back to County Board Wrap-Up. I'm your host, Kara O'Donnell, and today I'm chatting with County Board Chair Christian Dorsey as well as Board Member Matt DeFerranti about the key decisions the board made at its October meeting. Well, let's talk about Fire Station 8. We've been talking about Fire Station 8 on and off for a long time, but the board approved the schematic design contract, and what do we mean by that specifically?
So we have a community approved, if you will, design for the Fire Station number 8 rebuild, which also fits within our budget that we've allotted for the project, with a little bit of a supplementary budget that we adopted with the action this past month. But this feels like Fire Station 8 has been here during my entire tenure of running for and occupying this office. So this goes back to 2015, where there was a big process to determine where to rebuild or relocate Fire Station 8. An initial proposal to relocate it away from its current location met with a lot of resistance, and ultimately a community process determined wouldn't necessarily be the best approach. So it's going to be rebuilt in place, and through some strategic land acquisitions, we've got the ability to put the temporary fire station nearby while this new facility is built, and it's going to have all of the functionality that we need from a modern fire station, with 4 bays so that we can accommodate the equipment. And then more importantly, at least in my mind, we're going to do right by the firefighters, because we are going to have facilities to effectively decontaminate their equipment and the apparatus after use, which is something that we know will greatly inhibit the potential for illnesses like cancer, which are very prevalent among public safety personnel. So the decontamination units, allowing for this facility to have gender-neutral bathrooms and be open and accommodating to people of all genders. Really, it's going to be not only a state-of-the-art, but just a fire station that does right by its workers. And it's also going to honor the history of Fire Station 8, which has a very unique role in Arlington's history, being begun as an all African-American firefighting unit because, well, quite frankly, there were other firefighting units during the days of segregation which would not serve the community. So Fire Station 8 gets to maintain that legacy with some historical interpretations on site, in addition to being just a wonderful facility that will help catalyze, I think, the redevelopment of Lee Highway.
And through this design, how is, I've heard that some of that history is really going to come to life, so to speak, through that design. How is that working?
So I was excited. I don't know if you took a look, Matt. So one of the renderings that I saw is going to take the old Fire Station 8 medallion, which is very, very cool, and that's going to be prominently featured on the front of the building. There's also going to be a history walk, if you will, which is going to be a gallery, essentially, of the history of Fire Station 8. And I think they're talking about some interior features that will be open to the community. So, it's going to be kind of a cross between a fire station and a museum.
I was just going to say, it's like a mini museum inside the fire station. What have you heard from the firefighters themselves, those who are going to be working out of this station? What was it they most needed, and what are they really looking forward to with this new design?
So if, I'd been in the old Fire Station 8, and it was as well maintained as it could be, but it was an aging facility.
it
so
happens.
the
Yeah.
quarters were not sufficient enough to allow for any kind of an expanded staff. And this is a part of the county that's growing. So we needed a fire station that could meet the demands. And so we're adding the number of bays for equipment. We're adding the number of personnel who can actually be there full time. And this will be a dramatic improvement because people who worked in the old station really could never, you're always trying to make things fit when they couldn't quite be accommodated, so it was a struggle. But interestingly enough, the firefighters who worked there never really complained about it because they love having the honor of working at Fire Station 8. So they didn't want to make too much of a to-do about it. But now that they're going to get a new facility, I think they're going to be thrilled.
We'll see as the project moves forward. And one final topic we have is, of course, everyone's favorite lately, the scooters, dockless bikes.
Have
now,
you ridden one yet, Karen?
I have not.
You have not?
I
Okay,
will
all
fully
right.
admit I have not. But the board has taken almost a year now to really study the use of these scooters, the dockless bicycles, and come to some conclusions and are moving forward. Where are we right now?
Well, on this one, I think we've all described it a little bit in the meetings, but just to be clear, Virginia law does not allow us to ban scooters.
Right.
And I think that needs to be resaid because that has not always been the coverage of this. And so Virginia, the legislature this past year said that starting January 1st, there will be a lot of flexibility if localities don't act.
Okay.
So this is the first step in a two-part process. Next month, we will fully consider and act on the final piece of the process. But this is our staff and the county board discussing what are the right limitations and what's realistic and what do we want as far as enforcement, because there's certain things that we cannot do under state law. In addition to banning, we cannot, for example, require the use of a helmet. And so
Even though you should use a helmet.
You should always use a helmet.
Absolutely. So
but it cannot be required.
we had a discussion, heard a lot of feedback, and we had a discussion about what the parameters should be of those limitations and where we can sort of work together to make sure that, for example, you focused quite a bit on spaces for the scooters to be docked, because that's the sort of thing that can help change how scooters are being used. And we have an ability to help there where we might not have the authority to ban, et cetera. So,
what were some of the more interesting things that came out of this study? Like, what did you find that perhaps didn't surprise you overall, but what did you find that were kind of interesting little tidbits?
Well, I'll tell you, one thing that shocked me was finding out that among the 500,000 trips which have been taken in Arlington, the average length of the trip in terms of miles was a little more than 9/10 of a mile.
Really?
And my initial thought was,
Quarter mile, something like that. That's what I would have thought.
and I also just thought, well, why aren't people walking? But then as we dug into the data a little bit more, we found that people weren't using these to replace metro trips or bus trips. These were replacing these were creating trips that wouldn't have taken place otherwise. So people were using it to maybe go do something that's a mile away, maybe a little bit too far for them to have just willingly walked to, and they're just making supplemental trips. So it's really got an interesting niche, and that kind of surprised me a little bit, especially when I looked at the average amount of time that it takes, because the time was like 14 minutes to go a little less than a mile, and I'm thinking you can walk it that quickly. But hey, they're serving a role, and so it was exciting for me that they're not cannibalizing trips on transit and in other ways that wouldn't be beneficial for us. But the fact remains, given, as Matt said, we can't ban them, this study was really all about how to have these work harmoniously in our community. And I know we're not going to please everyone, but there are some things that I think we can do to make it so that our sidewalks don't become the wild, wild west, that these don't just become street litter, and that we recognize that in a community of walkers and cyclists and drivers and scooter riders, people who have easy mobility, limited mobility, perfect vision, limited vision, we've got to think about these things holistically if they're going to work well.
And I think it's important to say that we're going to focus on safety to the maximum extent that we can, but there are other technologies that have come forward that initially we have all been very wary of. And, you know, making sure that we keep focused on safety, this can really help with that last mile. And if you think of the reality of the months of July and August, or December and January and February, when there's not snow and sleet, this is a chance to help with transportation that I think can have a role. And as long as we focus and make sure we're strong on safety and take some of the practical steps that I was alluding to earlier, I think that this is something that we can work with.
And again, it's just kind of consumer education of using common sense while we're all sharing the road together.
Indeed. And, you know, I will say that, you know, we've looked at data in terms of crashes and all of the things that I think people usually get concerned with scooters. But as I've heard from people who do use them a lot, I have very much been convinced that this is not just people who love the whimsy of getting on something that reminds them of being a kid. It's actually serving a real need. And let's not forget, battery powered, zero emissions. The more we can have this sort of thing in our community, the better. It's our job to make sure it all harmoniously works together.
I mean, 5 years ago, we probably wouldn't have ever thought these would become
unbelievable, right?
Have the place they have in our community. Who knows what's next?
Sure. Well, I think it's also good that the team that's been taking in this data has included the police department throughout, which is key for safety purposes. And I think that's part of what will set us on a good, we'll consider it at this upcoming meeting, and will set us on a good foot as we move forward.
Okay, well, that is going to bring us to the end of this month's County Board wrap-up. Christian, Matt, thank you both very much for being
Kara.
here.
Thank you.
And remember, all of our County Board meetings are open to the public and live streamed and archived on our website. That's arlingtonva.us. Just search County Board. And if you want to tell us what you think about these and other issues, visit the county website, topics.arlingtonva.us/engage. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again next month.